Chapter 148. I don't have time for your personality right now, Elias. Archibald Carrison's voice snapped from the watch around the informant's wrist. Your little fiefdom is too close to Sinjao Beach. Leave. It's a neighborhood full of interesting people. Elias, wearing the same galoshes and accompanied by the same umbrella drone that had guarded him from the rain during his walk earlier that night, was helping an ancient-looking man down the front steps of a townhouse. Not a thief. And my personality has vastly improved since we first met. Don't you think you should reevaluate your friends at least every half-century? He released the man's arm at the bottom of the stairs, and the fellow shuffled off, following a poodle down the street. Elias watched him go before ambling away from the house toward the grassy central square in front of it. Sleyca can't come rescue you if anything goes wrong. Official orders have come in for most of our members. It's the same for the battle and aid groups. We're not in charge of responding to this catastrophe. The Artonans have decided it's their business. You sound so unhappy about that, Elias said. Would you actually rather have the children on the current High Council direct us through a magical disaster? Just so that we can all pretend a truly independent Anzidora isn't still a dream caught between a rock and a hard place? By the way, the rock in this analogy is Earth, and the hard place is, do you at least have a helicopter? Archibald ground out. I donated a couple to the rescue efforts. Tarek's flying one. His wife is in her hover suit. We'll be fine here without them. A few other people were emerging from houses. Several of them nodded or waved at Elias, but they all headed in the same direction as the old man. None joined the informant in the well-lit square. It was only him, standing by a 3-meter-tall fountain shaped like a pithos, and his wet golden retriever running toward him, tennis ball in its jaws. They all have their gear on them, don't they? He asked as he accepted the ball. Nobody left out? All neighborhood residents are on their way to the community center as you instructed, and everyone has at least 2 connected devices with them. The voice in his ear was smooth and calm. Mood. Calm overall. The parents of the children that were teleported away, yes. I see. Sent a message from me to each of them. The content should be a firm reassurance that their children will be well cared for and that minors being teleported out by the system in this situation is completely expected. Tweak each note to comfort the individual recipient. Without lying, of course. Such a personal touch, Archibald said caustically. You're still there, Archie? The informant tossed the ball for his dog again, then shoved his hands into his coat pockets. At his back, water spilled over the rim of the pithos and through a grate that was nearly hidden by the grass. Don't you have better things to do than worry over my business? I'd hate to think I'm distracting one of the best water shapers on Anzidora from his duties. What quest have you been given, by the way? I haven't been the best in years. Don't give me another one of your speeches about the nature of magic. And you know what I'm doing. I'm carrying your bloody spy equipment around with me while I shove water back into the ocean. Every 2 minutes, here it comes again, trying to crawl towards some random spot like it's been magnetized. The evacuation is almost done. We'll be ordered to completely abandon Sinjao soon, and you and your people with it. How are you all liking the infogir tonight? How are you going to protect yourself and all the rest of them from giant waves? I don't doubt you've had your right fan club. I assume you mean my employees and apprentices. Get the place out. But unless that thing you've built, you always act like it's something shocking. It's just a larger version of what I've always done, improved over the course of the years by myself and other talented wrights. With a nice custom personality helping me keep track of it all. Can see the future now. I don't think you're prepared for this. I didn't. But I didn't need to, said Elias. After all, the Artonans have decided the events of tonight are their business. Good luck with that sailboat, by the way. What sailboat? That one, said Elias, as Archibald's half of the conversation devolved into shouted orders and splashing sounds. See you in the morning. He ended the call. You know, his granddaughter was grateful for the phones I sent her, he said to the dog. She thanked me through the drone. I only took one peek to see how she was using them, and of course she's being responsible to a fault. She's already got 100 other teenagers sorted out and obeying a call schedule. Impressive. And a shame. It would be interesting to see how far Carison could go with their powers if they were just a little more willing to color outside the lines. The negotiator you've been expecting just sent a message ahead, the voice in his ear said. It's former Ambassador Leibfeth. They've pulled her in? It was probably her own idea. I did always like her. She says she must ask if you are finally amenable to selling your personal creation to the Triplanets, given the fact that it will almost certainly be damaged or destroyed by tonight's events without their intervention. Elias reached out toward the fountain, and the smooth curtain of water parted for him automatically. An object was embedded in the stone there, a small black circle, glittering with magic around the edges and so dark at the center that it looked like a hole. He pressed his hand to it. Tell her I'm touching the first key of voices I ever made. So much tedious enchanting. Tell her I'm feeling nostalgic, and I couldn't possibly part with it. He looked around the empty square. Or with any of the other keys I've created on my own time in the past 8 decades. A minute later, the voice said, she understands and looks forward to negotiating with you for the use of your creation and its protection. She is bringing a tattooist with her and hopes you will pardon her presumption. Of course, said the informant. Then he sighed. I suppose we can't drive a very hard bargain. At some point it becomes too tempting for them to build their own from scratch. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Winston Yellfeather wasn't the kind of man who could stay in the school gym while innocent people were dying. He had realized that when he overheard a couple of girls from the sciences program saying how this was the worst thing that had ever happened to Anzidora. A night that would go down in history. Something everybody in the world would be talking about when the dust settled. Or the water drained away. A time for heroes. It would just be too lame, when everyone asked him what he had been doing during the crisis, if he had to say, staying in the school gym with my teachers like they told me to. That wasn't the win-win way. I don't know about win-win as a nickname, he thought. What if it's too catchy, and it gets used more often than Yellfeather? He was blasting through Boomtown. One of his personal camera drones watched from above, and 2 were set up to catch shots of him speed climbing the side of a building to break into an apartment and see if a woman he'd met at the bus stop had left the stove on. Not quite the heroic mission he'd been hoping for, but there just wasn't a lot of drama in Midtown Apex right now. He'd have to build the story into something more. Sometimes being a hero isn't about doing the glamorous thing. It's about helping whoever needs you even if the need is small. That sounded lame. His fans would know it was lame. He really needed to not be lame tonight. He'd left them all right after the class dinner to edit the gym footage, and it was just. His parents could never be allowed to see it. The world could never witness it. Winston was going to make Yellfeather a household name. Even before the sirens had started, Winston had known he wouldn't be able to sleep. Because what was he going to do if someone let the full footage slip? It wasn't just his classmates. The other first years had access. So many people had seen a rabbit kill him and then walk off without even looking at him. All right, Alden had said as he stepped around Winston's gasping face. So that's done. That's done. Like beating a higher-ranked avowed with a piece of string was an errand he'd checked off his list. I knew it, Winston thought, jumping up and grabbing onto one of the dips in the building's honeycomb facade. I knew he was doing it all on purpose. The rabbit boy was sneaky and a really good actor, so he had doubted his own suspicions. But now he was sure of one thing, Alden Thorne was only pretending not to care about his own growing popularity. Bees got zero attention from the people who enjoyed watching the talent development programs. The adults loved the thrill of picking a winning horse before anyone knew about it. The teens loved imagining themselves becoming an avowed one day, too. Neither group rooted for the underdog. So of course Alden couldn't act like he wanted a fan base. It would be so embarrassing. Like that B-rank chick in one of Winston's classes who everyone gossiped about because she was open about wanting to rank up. Instead, the rabbit orchestrated his image in secret and acted innocent about it. Oh, I accidentally attended a party full of the super rich while dressed like the boy next door, and I unexpectedly encountered a crazy person there, and I just happened to deliver some more dramatic backstory about myself on camera. It was a total coincidence that I was holding a plate of class-themed food. It's not like I dropped it to call attention to it. He had messed up this time, though. There was no way he hadn't been wildly celebrating his victory over Winston. Walking over a higher-ranked competitor like they were invisible was too far. It was something you'd only do if you were desperately trying to look like you didn't care. There had been other signs, too. Obviously, Alden's play was to let rumors about him build and build among other people's fans so that when he finally posted something online like everyone else, it would explode. It was so smart that Winston was afraid the school might be in on it. They could be setting Alden up as one of the faces of the first-year class. There had been rumors for months about a CNH reality show of some kind. What if he'd already been cast? Winston. That's you, isn't it? At the sound of the hated accent, Winston's musings cut off and he looked down. That singing Scottish show-off was standing in the alley beside a pile of right scrap. Out of breath. Ruining Winston's footage. Actually, it was already a little ruined. He had stopped climbing to mull over Alden Thorne's true nature. He'd need to do this again just to make sure he had it all smooth. What are you doing? Finley called. Shouldn't you be at school? I'm helping people. There's a stove on in one of these apartments. It could set the whole place on fire. He started climbing again. But, Winston. Finley's voice was loud. Couldn't you just go inside and use the lift? Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Connie kept waking up from dreams she couldn't remember, with a bad feeling in her gut that the girls would be gone. It had just happened again, and she lay in bed listening to Brody's heavy breathing, trying to convince herself not to go check on his two nieces. They were sleeping over for the first time tonight, giving their parents a weekend off. It's dumb. They're fine. Just go back to sleep. Instead, she threw off the warm covers and slipped out of the bed, careful not to wake her boyfriend. Fiancé probably. That ring he'd been hiding for at least a couple of weeks was for her probably. She was going to say yes probably. It all felt a little unstable. Trying to find some solid ground, after distracting yourself for your whole adulthood with a merry-go-round of a life, was hard. She had started looking up people she remembered from back home, and she knew they weren't all tucked away in great careers, in big white houses chosen for their school districts, in clothes that looked like the clothes their parents had worn. But a lot of them were. A whole lot of them. They were taking their 8-year-olds to ball games. They were packing lunchboxes with cheese slices cut into star shapes and giving each other tips about how if you used chocolate chips instead of raisins for your ants on a log, you could get the kids used to eating celery. The vinyl floor was cold to her bare feet. The old hall carpet had been stained ever since she and Alden moved into this place. It had looked gross even if you vacuumed, which she hardly ever did. A couple of months after he had gone missing, she'd freaked out and ripped it all up. Brody had called one of his cousins, and the vinyl had gone down. She mopped it twice a week. She couldn't figure out if that was too often or not often enough. Maybe I stayed on the merry-go-round for so long I'll always be dizzy. In the living room, the girls were fine. Of course. They were side by side on the air mattress their parents had sent with them. The little one was a drooler. The older one was sleeping with a hand against her cheek. In the light leaking through the window, the manicure Connie had given her was on full display. A different color for every fingernail. Maybe I should have let them have Alden's room. Nobody had asked. She hadn't offered. But that was the obvious thing, wasn't it? To give them the second bedroom instead of letting them sleep on the floor. She couldn't even figure that much out. She went to check the fridge to see if they'd eaten any of the pricey lime green go-in-the-squeeze tubes. The parents who cut cheese into star shapes said neon-colored Artone and vegetable pudding was in. Not yet. She stared at the groceries for a while. Then the floor. Then the girls. If I gave them his old room, I don't think he'd mind. She wasn't sure she'd know if he did. He had never been a kid that would make you feel too bad. He would put up with a whole lot before he even showed he was annoyed. which should have made me put in more effort. Not less. The sound of the front door's deadbolt sliding, as if invisible fingers were unlatching it, caught her attention. She looked over, not quite as alarmed as she would have been if she'd understood what was happening, and saw the knob turning. What? Before she could panic, the door was open. A wizard stood there, sliding a ring into the pocket of her pants. She was holding a 2-liter bottle of cherry cola under one arm, and there was a laundry bag squirming at her feet. Her facial expression was gloomy. "Healer Ryan, is it?" Connie whispered. The head of the Chicago House of Healing was familiar to her from a brief meeting when Alden was younger and, more recently, through occasional local good news stories about people she had saved. She always looked either grouchy or depressed in those photos and videos, as if she wished the patients had died. According to Alden, his mother had been very fond of the healer and proud to work with her. Connie didn't get it, but it wasn't like she'd been around to see it for herself. "Connie Hatcher," said Ryan, "is it, for some reason, Leah's child thinks your life should be prioritized above those of geniuses, avowed, and other humans who contribute greatly to your species." Her eyes slid from Connie's startled face to the squirming bag at her feet. "I suppose it is too late to try to guide his decision-making now." The bag meowed. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Elijah's heart drummed, and her hands curled into fists at her side as she stood quietly in a cramped employees-only bathroom with her roommates. They were all so still that the motion-sensitive lights had cut off, but they'd been trapped in here for long enough that she could make out shapes by the yellow glow that slipped through the gap at the bottom of the door. Natalie was standing against the sink, swallowing so frequently that Elijah had learned the sound of it. And Hadaisa was beside the toilet brush, her feet covered in multiple layers of the novelty socks they'd found in this little knick-knack shop when they first sought shelter here. It was only supposed to be for a minute. They'd been hurrying away from the Bunker Street situation when some swift and awful shift in the crowd had turned the angry press toward the shelter into a true riot. The girls had run down a street, and then they'd all been suddenly blinded by a pink bolt of a spell that had ripped Natalie's umbrella from her hand. Elijah didn't know why. They'd seen a metal grate go flying through the air, into the face of a man on a moped. They'd smelled smoke. They'd heard a woman screaming instructions through a spell tool of some kind, but none of them knew if the instructions were for them. They couldn't understand the language she spoke. Most people were angry. A few people were laughing. Everyone shouted. Nobody shouted in Lithuanian. Elijah understood English words like chaos, red, fuck them, ours, without understanding what was causing the battle around her. Getting off the street, away from the impossible thing that was happening, avowed fighting avowed right here in public where other people could be hurt, hadn't been a decision the girls made together. They had just moved in unison toward the first hiding spot they'd seen. This dark little shop with the door broken in. Normally, a place with a broken door would be somewhere Elijah avoided. But it had looked like safety tonight. It had been safe at first. So safe that they'd stayed, huddled in the back of the shop, watching the madness on the street through the window like it was a theater screen. The traffic had rapidly disappeared. Sometimes, a couple of minutes would pass without anyone running by. But the sound of the ongoing riot, still at the bunker entrance, Elijah assumed, didn't let up. The three of them had started for the exit at one point, only for a traffic light to slam into the pavement right in front of the door, sending fragments flying through that barely missed them. For a while, it had felt like going outside would be stepping into a war zone. And now, the voices of the people who'd entered the shop were muffled through the bathroom walls. It made picking out even the few words Elijah might have known impossible. But Natalie and Hadaisa weren't moving, so she didn't move either. They should be gone by now. Natalie at least. Her timer had been shorter. Had it changed? Had she rejected her teleport so that she could stay with the two of them? There was no way to ask. The system was still telling them to head to the condominium building. Another notice had come through about not interfering with the people wearing the red halos. Elijah would not be getting a teleport timer. I couldn't have used it anyway right now. I couldn't have used it with the girls still here. They were younger than her. Hadaisa could be too mature for her own good, but they both felt like they needed looking after. What am I going to do if the people out there come in here? What if they want to fight? What if they won't let us go? She felt weak. She knew she was practically the same person she'd always been. And Zedora threw rank and class in your face more than she'd expected. But it didn't really bother her very often. Being hung up on getting less magic, when you'd been expecting no magic, was stupid. 6 months ago, Elijah was an ordinary girl. She was worrying that her life was going to stall if she didn't get out of her hometown, but she didn't want to hurt her mother's feelings by saying home wasn't enough. That day the system had spoken to her had felt like an answer. And Zedora avowed a brand new life in the most exciting place on earth. She wanted to love it here. She had loved it here. But every now and then, during Diwali, when they'd been trying to watch the fireworks with the crowd at the span, she'd gotten shoved around too much. And it wasn't like being jostled in any crowd she'd ever been in. Arms moving so fast that she couldn't tell if they were going to hit her or not until the owner was already past. Little bumps that almost took her off her feet even though the other person didn't seem to notice. Natalie and Hadassah didn't seem to have the same trouble, but, well, they were both really high on the noticeability scale. The balcony with the hot tub had taken her mind right off of the discomfort at night. But here it was again. I am not someone who can fight back against an avowed. Not any avowed. Maybe another little F-rank rabbit. I don't think the people out there are all F-rank rabbits. Aren't they ever going to leave? It was probably only the dark, the stillness, and the fear. But their incomprehensible conversation had a tone to it that Elijah though was conspiratorial. They sounded like they were planning something. And like, maybe, they were hyping each other up for their plans. Suddenly, there was a clatter from outside the door that made her flinch and Natalie gasp. The bathroom light clicked on for a second, and they all three froze again, staring at each other. One of the voices shouted, "Be serious. This is serious business. They are keeping us away from one of the only chaos-rated shelters. They aren't allowed to do that. They aren't allowed to send us to some random tower without a single fucking shield on it. We ran halfway across F to get here. This is our island. We've got rights." Elijah understood they, serious, chaos, demon, and shelter. She imagined terrible things. "I've got to take a leak," another voice said. Elijah understood none of that. But she understood the sudden change in Hadassah's expression, the tiny sound Natalie made, the stomp of feet getting louder and louder. The light went off. The door swung open, and it blinked back on. A long-haired man who looked just a few years older than her, wearing heavy bracers with stones set in them, stared at the three of them. "Our bathroom," said Elijah, her voice coming out hard. Like she actually had some authority over this particular lavatory. "Not for you. Go. We're just hiding out in here from the danger," said Natalie. She was talking too fast, but she had turned on that smile that seemed to make every quirk charming. "It was bad out there. Do you think it's safe for us to leave yet?" Elijah couldn't even decipher the words, but she found herself nodding along in agreement. Hadassah had paused in the act of reaching for the toilet brush. What she was going to do with that was anyone's guess. What kind of a weapon is a toilet brush, anyway? "We were on our way to Norsehorse Condominium," said Natalie. "It's that way, isn't it?" She pointed toward a wall. The man was gaping, mostly at her. Elijah analyzed his face. This might be all right. That's a good face. People gaping at Natalie Quire was business as usual. The high appeal was startling, but most people liked it. It was, after all, something you were supposed to like. "Oh, yeah. Yeah." The man smiled at them. "That's the way, all right. But it's pretty rough out there. Don't you three want to wait here? When we bust into the bunker, everybody on our side can come with us, and you can work for your chance at safety or you can leave." The tall brunette woman who'd stalked up behind the man to see what was going on had a face like an iceberg. "I didn't help build that shelter with my own two hands only to be teleported off to a random high-rise when the big day finally came. and I didn't build it so a bunch of pretty faces could waltz in after we'd fought for it. She and the man exchanged a few words in another language, and then she stared at Natalie. That much of a beauty boost and still stuck here? Obviously a rabbit. What's a rabbit going to do when the demons come? Said Natalie. I just want to do what the system says. And chaos exposure is low. I don't need a special shelter or anything, ma'am. We are going, said Hadassah firmly. Elijah nodded in solidarity. She didn't get the conversation, but she got that her friends weren't happy. And the word going. Yes. Let's be going. Let's go. Away from all of this. She was sure she'd rather deal with whatever the ocean was doing than with these people. They shuffled out of the bathroom. Elijah felt odd all of a sudden. Like her body was too light and the world was too slow. Maybe, she thought, I locked my knees while we were hiding out in there. When she was little, her teacher had locked her knees for too long during a school program and had fainted. She walked out behind Natalie and Hadassah, through the little shop. There were only 5 others in here. It had sounded like a much larger group from the volume of their conversation. One woman had a cut on her forehead. A man, standing on guard by the door, had a wrist cannon. None of them had the red halos. Fajir has cut us off. Should have known an old high rank like the informant was on their side, a gray-haired man spat. I voted for the Bunker Street shelter every year for a decade. People said it was a waste of funds to prep for chaos, but now they all want in. We need to find a member of the Sway Relay. Talk to the others. These are not normal people, thought Elijah. Whatever they are saying it so angrily. Hey! Natalie had just made it out the door. Her shoes were crunching on pieces of traffic light. She stopped as the man on guard grabbed her arm. Hey! We could use this one. He looked back at his friends. We could use all of them. Bait. Or put them out front when we go in. The Red Rings are still playing around like they're scared of their own powers, and if these 3 are rabbits they're not tough at all. They'll have to think and think again about how to attack us, right? An argument started around them. Chinese, English, something else. The gray-haired man had gone to stand on the other side of Natalie. The door was blocked now. Are they going to keep us here? How long? What if the tsunami happens? What if more spells fly in? Hadassah's voice was rising as she rounded on the woman with the iceberg face. Elijah didn't know the words. Natalie was biting her lip and struggling to break away from the grip around her arm. Her golden eyes were watering. You're hurting her, Elijah said in Lithuanian. Wrist gun. You're hurting my friend. Let go. Hadassah made for the door, and the woman with the cut tried to grab her. Hadassah ducked. Natalie cried out. Elijah took a step. It was the first step of a running tackle. She was aiming for the arm holding Natalie. She was going to throw her entire body weight at the arm, and then maybe it would give, and maybe they could run, and it wasn't really a plan, it was just what she was doing because suddenly this was all going wrong so fast and their choices were to hope for the best or get away. And she wanted them to get away. The first step should have been one of several. 3 or 4 to the door, to the men, to freedom. Instead, that first step launched her body across the room like she'd been shot from a gun. She'd been shot from a gun. But everything was just a little slow. She felt so light. She was flying toward that arm, and it was different than she'd thought it would be. She had time to pull her elbows in, to put her fists up in front of her face, to think, what the? And then she hit him. It hurt. Like tackling someone as hard as you should, she imagined. But that was the only normal thing about it. There was a crack of sound, and his arm was no longer an obstacle. She tried to slow herself with a second step, but the momentum of her own body was too much. She didn't quite get a foot underneath her properly before she slammed into obstacle number 2, the other man blocking the door. Then he was falling backwards over the remnants of the traffic light, slamming into the pavement, and she was falling on top of him and righting herself almost in the same instant. Her body had become a baffling machine she was trying to drive, completely unpredictable even as it felt like it should be easier to control. Run! She was screaming as she stood back up. She knew that word in English. Hadaisa was shouting the same thing. Let's run. She started to go. But she went way too fast and had to stop herself so that she wasn't leaving the others behind. She stood in the middle of the battle-scarred street with her chest heaving, her arms out, and her legs splayed like a newborn foal's. Like she was trying to balance even though her sense of her body being wrong didn't seem to be improved by the posture at all. Elijah was very, very confused. When the other two caught up, Natalie was sobbing. Hadaisa grabbed Elijah's arm and pulled. She shouted run, and Elijah ran again. And it happened again. She ran too far too fast and stopped. Same useless safety posture as before. This time, when the other girls reached her, Hadaisa shouted a question. Natalie good? Elijah asked. Not hurt? Natalie grabbed her around the neck and hugged her. So that was probably a sign that she wasn't hurt too badly. Hadaisa shouted a question again, staring at Elijah. I bet she's asking me what's going on. I would like to know that, too. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. The span had been emptied of people some time ago. Plopstar had teleported away to another assignment. The abandoned vehicles stood there, being periodically washed, or washed away, by the contaminated sea. No Avowed had received official orders through the system to guard the bridge, so members of the Apex NF City police forces who hadn't been called for duty as Red Halos had been assigned to stand at either end and prevent crossings. The job had been rough earlier, particularly on the Apex side, but now that almost everyone had seen what the deadly water could do, either in person or through local news, they weren't having as much trouble. It had been 20 minutes since someone had made a serious attempt to break through the loose line of high ranks and try their luck on a bridge that was looking more and more impassable with every watery assault. There were sections missing. The wreckage of a sailboat had landed 2 kilometers from the F side. Only a few people had broken through after the span was cleared, and those few. It's like this, son, an older rank brute said gruffly to the short blonde boy who'd approached the barrier that had been set up to save fools from themselves. A series of 10 barrel-shaped devices stood in a line, powering a curtain shield. If you were strong enough to cross the bridge without trouble, you'd be strong enough to get past us without asking. Now, why don't you head with Samara to a shelter? You don't mind, do you, Samara? Before the woman he'd called out could answer, the boy pursed his lips and then said, I hate to try this, but would it make a difference if I told you I was a Vilra? The brute peered down at him. Are you attempting to bribe me? I'm not sure. I don't usually do things like. Would bribing you work? You know, said the officer tiredly, this isn't a game. What's happening out there is serious. People have been hurt. And we don't have time for kids who. I know it's not a game, said the boy. I'm trying to get to my dad. One of his friends texted to say he was last seen hours ago, drunk and heading to a beach. I'm just going to go have a look around for him. Your father's probably already somewhere safe. Samira piped up from her post in front of the curtain. There was a break in the rain at the moment, but her raincoat was still freckled with droplets. The Artonans are helping with emergency response and the system has been teleporting everyone who needs it. There's nothing to worry. She trailed off as she saw the look on his face. The interdimensional warrior's contract isn't giving a free salvation teleport to everyone, he said flatly. Not everybody who lives on Anzidora is an Avowed. Well. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I'll go to the shelter on my own. I can get there. I'm an S rank. Don't worry about me. The boy started to walk away, then he looked back over his shoulder to peer at the curtain. How high is that? 20 meters? Fine. Have a good night. Line of asterisks. Lutvalra didn't know what he had expected from that conversation. Nothing had been the most likely result, and nothing was what he'd gotten. But there were still rules in his head that had to be followed. Listen to police. Obey grown-ups. Keep your head down and live quietly around all the Avowed. That last one was almost gone. Crumbling. You couldn't actually be a strong Avowed and not know, on some level, that you were. Loot had so many of the same thoughts and hang-ups he'd always had, but his body was different. Those thoughts came from a mind that worked differently. When Lexi made snide comments, he could turn his ears on if he wanted and notice the exact tones he was using to tell if his roommate was really in a bad mood or if he was just saying ill-tempered things out of habit. It was habit at least half the time. Loot blamed Constantine for probably being the kind of brother who required constant nagging. But Chainer was a class that had kept Loot more separate from other avowed than others probably would have. He had a part-time job on the Triplanets. He couldn't join any class-focused clubs or properly talk about his magic with anyone but his own relatives and an overly enthusiastic, intimidatingly zealous Artonan. So there was still a part of him that despaired when he saw all those high ranks standing in front of the right May shield, guarding the bridge that separated him from that stupid idiot Mauron Searle. Those were real avowed. Those were the strong people at the top of the Anisidran rank pyramid. Loot was packing a second S skill that's useless for this. Gifted with some of the best hands a human can wear and a voice that can hit notes nobody should be able to. Completely incapable of targeting people without the system's help unless they're hot or hateable. Before he'd gotten the text telling him about where his dad had last been seen, he'd been wandering the MPE gym, trying to get his targeting to work. To distract himself from the anxiety of not knowing where either of his parents were and to prove to himself that he was not some terrible system-born lust creature whose powers were supposed to work that way. He had managed to gift chains by deliberately obsessing over someone while he cast. He'd been relieved to discover the hateable method because at least it was proof there wasn't only one way to do it. I just needed to access a certain quality of focus. It was coincidence that I figured that out in such an awkward way. He'd learned to do it in a less embarrassing manner as soon as possible, take the secret with him when he died, and nobody would ever know. But for now, he walked away from the police line, focused on a few of Elijah's wonderful qualities, and wove his hands while he chanted one more force of the traveler's body for her. He had already done 3 of those. And a few other things. Desperately hoping. She was an F-rank rabbit. She'd be super low priority for teleport, and who knew what trouble she might run into on a night like this? Loot doubted any of the word chains were landing on her. He had no clue what his range was. He had never tested it because it had always been far enough to do his job. But he didn't believe it was the 10+ kilometers it would need to be to actually help her. Maybe, if he was very lucky, just one would make it through. Now for me. He had already layered so many that he'd felt like he was trying to operate an alien being by remote control on his run here. Self-mastery was working overtime. He had given up on controlling some of the things he usually enjoyed micromanaging, his expressions, his tone, so that he could focus on the big things that needed to be operated perfectly to avoid disaster. Like his arms and legs. And the negative side effects of that one. Loot didn't know if it was even possible to become aware of individual cells, but he had reached a point where he was seriously considering that it might be. The human body was a disgusting meat puppet entrapping the soul, and nobody should ever be forced to acknowledge their own guts processing their last meal. What makes someone a great chainer? A question he had never wanted to care about. The system gave you the hands, the mouth, the ears, the memory. And it gave you the package of tools for the actual mass bestowal part of the job. Which Loot couldn't currently access. To make you a chainer, the family or the palace shoved your nose into a book for decades and forced you to gobble down hundreds of obscure chains that did almost the same things as the hundreds of other obscure chains you'd already learned. Eternal. Memorization. Homework forever. But other than that, what was there? What was it, anyway, that made a chainer good? It's getting word chains to land on you or on the people you're casting them for. Chains didn't always answer. Alaya had obnoxious theories about how high ranks were more in tune with the universe. About how that made word chains like them more or something. Maybe Loot should have stolen a few more lessons from her before he cut her out of his life, so he could understand exactly what she thought. He did know that most people couldn't stack more than a dozen casts of a single word chain on themselves. They were supposed to stop landing for you at some point. He hadn't thought he could do it. but he'd just done it. With more than one chain. Huh. The thing was, Loot didn't actually know truly strong word chains yet. He was still a novice. He had his questionable understanding of Artonin and his beginner chaining books that he'd been memorizing for the past year like a good boy. And harmony, which he'd asked for specifically. Plus whatever specialty things Parvati gave him for work or as random surprises. It was a lot compared to everyone else, but by S-rank chainer standards he was barely taking his first step. But to run kilometers across a partially destroyed bridge, to guarantee he could survive in the water if it sank, to make it to F and, hopefully, his father. Luther felt, for the first time in his life, like he needed a lot of magic. All he had, though, was one skill he could barely use, another he couldn't use at all in this situation, and his two small word chains. So he kept casting them. And they just kept coming for him. He decided it wasn't a time for questions. But he remembered his grandmother turning blind eyes toward him that night and smiling. He remembered Hazel, losing that cruel little word chain casting contest to him, even though he didn't speak Artonin. Even though she was a prodigy. He cast another force of the traveler's body on himself. It gave you strength for your travels, which was just plain old strength as far as Loot was concerned on a normal day, but he was hoping for more now. That's enough. That's got to be enough. One more, and I'll explode. He was stronger, faster, and more durable than he'd ever been before. The vision in his eye was more acute. He could count every strand of hair touching his face. His mental focus was wildly enhanced, though there was so much to focus on that it didn't feel like it was. He stopped working down the abandoned street and turned back to look at the line of guards and the shining barrier. He had gone far enough that they had to be relaxed by now. He had gone so far that most of them probably couldn't even see him anymore. Dad, you dumb shit. I hate you. I miss you. Please don't be dead. He wondered what it was going to feel like to leave the ground. To make the choice. To finally, once and for all, throw himself into the sky. Fast enough that the speedster over there can't catch you, thought Loot. Strong enough that the strong one can't grab you. Get there before any spell can reach you. Now. He launched himself forward. The pavement released a sharp report. By the time they realized Luther was coming, he was already 30 meters over their heads. Chapter 149. Escherty's hand rested on Alden's shoulder for a few seconds more before falling away. While the knight took his seat again, angling it for a better view of the window, Alden tried to pull his thoughts back together. I'm sorry for babbling. He'd already said that. Sorry for not being myself today. Or for showing you the parts of myself that are kind of crazy. On second thought, apologizing again when the man had said there was no need for the first one probably wasn't the best idea. Alden had already been lightly admonished for excess humility. He was sure Escherty had a painful zinger for people who kept saying sorry for things that weren't really controllable. Alden was just embarrassed to have blurted out a bunch of morbid questions that showed he wasn't as cool as he wanted to be. Uncomfortable to have shown an expert on the way things fracture that he wasn't quite glued back together from the blows he had taken before this recent one. You were frightened. Of more than seeing the body of the radiant single quote H. I'm very happy that the contract is well, he said awkwardly. Thank you for telling me. I wish everyone could be comforted by such easy assurances greater than. Is there anything else you want to ask me? There were 1,000 questions Alden wanted answered and so few he felt comfortable asking. This kind stranger had saved his life, and he could ruin it just as easily. He shifted in his seat as he thought, and he landed on the most obvious question. The people who did this. Do you know why they did it? I don't, said Escherty, sweeping his braids over one shoulder before leaning into the chair's cushioned back. Not for certain. And whatever stories lips may shape in the coming days, no one else will be completely certain either. Unless we manage to find something new. You are, of course, aware that your contract can know your thoughts? Alden nodded. He was under the impression that it didn't constantly know everything he thought, but it could know anything. And you're aware that your thoughts aren't something the contract is supposed to share? Alden remembered his first ever chat with the blank system mannequin and its explanation about why it wouldn't be tattling to the Artonans about the existence of the gremlin. Violation of spiritual or mental privacy incurs a debt. Yes. I know it has rules about that. And messages sent through it are private, too. Escherty nodded once. But if someone wanted to destroy a world, and they had the means to do so, the contract's silence would be more costly than breaking that rule. The same would be true if a person wanted to destroy this place. Or to murder millions on Anzidora. Avowed are usually free to act as you wish and use your powers to harm who you will. But there are limits. Asking why the limits weren't harsher was bound to be dissatisfying. So it was an avowed who planned the attack? He asked instead. It was an avowed. But it seems the plan didn't exist until almost the moment the act was begun. The contract would have given warning sooner so that the person could have been stopped if there had been signs. Alden watched the sun rise while he considered that. There were no clouds in the sky, and this room where he and the night sat was high enough up that the waves appeared small. So it was just random, he said at last. One human being suddenly deciding to do a bad thing. Does that answer satisfy greater than your unquiet thoughts greater than? I don't know. He touched his good hand to the bandage on his cheek, remembering the unstoppable force of that waist-high water that had taken him off his feet the first time. In that moment, he'd been as helpless to control what was happening to him as a doll tossed into a washing machine. Escherty had said Alden's luck was bad. That he'd had the misfortune of being too close to too many of the cracks. His luck was bad, but if it had been a little worse. If I hit my head on something, if something had stabbed me in the wrong place, if I couldn't move that weird chair off of me and I just sat there slowly freezing to death. It feels wrong, he said. It feels wrong for someone to have done so much damage and hurt so many people randomly. In some ways, it was the best possible reason. An organized group trying to destroy peace on Earth would be worse. But it still felt like one avowed with one magical device shouldn't have the power to ruin as much as they had. I'm sorry I can't give you more than this right now, said Escherty. Your contract is also unhappy with the answer. Alden blinked. But I thought the contract was the one that provided the answer? It was. From the moment the trouble began, it's been searching for other explanations and making creative decisions to supply itself with even more information. This answer is what it has for the time being. But it also insists greater than that the avowed involved shouldn't have attacked this place. In its estimation, the chance of such an assault greater than didn't exist when the seafaring vessel greater than carrying the submerger greater than began its journey. Alden decided he didn't like submerger as a translation for the cause of all of this. Zeraide's sinker sender name for the magical artifact had been more explanatory. Drowner Destroyer would have been a good choice, too. If there was a mystery to be solved about why this had all happened, he'd just have to hope the system, the Artonans, and whoever they'd let help them were smart enough to do it. His thoughts were interrupted by another question from Escherty. Do you feel resentment toward the contract or the true planets for not doing more for you? What? You're hurt. You almost lost your life. It would be understandable. The Artonan's tone was the same interested but unconcerned one he'd used while asking his questions about the deaths of the three who'd tried to steal the flyer. Do I feel resentment? Would I have expected more if I'd imagined something like this happening? Alden had to ponder it for a minute. Melt sounded more like a joke now. Sitting here in this very warm room, in the sunlight, he didn't really think the system was out to get him. At least not when it's having a good to medium day. I don't feel that way, he said. The contracts wouldn't have saved me from an attack by another avowed on a normal night. Unless I was fast enough to use an emergency teleport. And it must have given out thousands more teleports than usual. I got one. Before everyone else. And I was given a flyer. He had been angry and scared so many times while it was going on, but the person who did this, the people who hurt Zeraide, the ones who were focused on using others, I resent them. He had a larger list of resentments if they went back in time, But he didn't think he was being asked to cough up all his feelings about his childhood, his affixation, and people who left scientists stranded on moons. "Your perspective is reasonable," said Ashurti. "There are different perspectives that are also reasonable. Many of them have been spoken over the past day, so I was curious to hear yours. What are the other perspectives?" Alden thought of Marx, and the Long siblings, and the woman on the motorcycle, of the Artonans who considered about to be beasts of burden, those who thought they were children, and those who believed they were existential threats. The gifts from the Holy Universe people are too hard to imagine until I've met one. Maybe Luke's boss is like that? No. That could just be the reflected glory of Alisart's single quotation shining on me and making him talk about spotlight organs. He glanced at his companion. Ashurti hadn't moved his eyes separately once since he had taken his hand from Alden's shoulder. He was always looking with both of them, either at Alden or out the window. Right now, one of his fingers traced a swirl on the front of the padded armrest. "This person fights demons," thought Alden. "He pulled me out of the water. He and his partner are knights. I'm betting neither of them decide to become one in exchange for a system saving their asses in an emergency. Oh no. I really did that, didn't I? I was facing down death. I made the decision. And then." He clasped his hands in his lap and sat up straighter, pretending to admire the view while in truth he was processing what he'd done, or attempted to do, for the first time since it had happened. Alden didn't know if using the mother privilege to ask for a favor meant he'd instantly be shoved into a uniform, made to swear oaths, and presented to the primary with a gift bow on his head. "Here, I got you a new one. He's tall, and some of his parts are put together differently, but he's got an Oriad." But he did believe it was an agreement to gallop in that direction with little or no chance for turning back. It's a privilege for knights. A privilege for people who are owed. Here was Ashurti, enjoying a break after a hard day and night of flood rescues, death investigations, and whatever else he'd been up to. Lindauta was still out there, probably slow-mo skilling mountains of ocean into obedience. There were people who celebrated their Svulgiveness by babysitting human S-ranks and engaging in some casual demon slaughter. They were almost certainly owed. Alden wondered how many affixations Ashurti had been through. How many people he'd saved. How many bodies he'd seen fall. I wonder if he was around Stuart's age when he became one. It had to be a major decision. Personal sacrifice. After all, he could have just been a wizard. Free and clear. Power without pain. He tightened his hands around each other and then stopped when it hurt the left one. I totally got rejected. Was it because they were already coming to save me? Or because my attitude wasn't? He cut his eyes sideways to peek at the knight. If I assume he's on par with Lindauta, then he's massively strong. He must have been through a lot of affixations. "I'm sorry," Alden blurted. Ashurti looked over at him with a head tilt. "What are you apologizing for?" "Damn. That just came out. Now what?" He cast around for something that wasn't sad or weird to say and settled on being informative. "I should have told you, there's so much more food downstairs in the kitchen. There's a man who's been cooking for a long time. If being in my presence makes you nervous, you don't have to stay here," said Ashurti in a neutral tone. Alden winced. "You're not making me nervous. I'm making myself stupid with stressful thoughts. I doubt my questions about people who tried to kill you helped. But if that's how it is, why don't you pull out the task you were working on when I found you?" That particular task was so far from Alden's mind now that it took him a few seconds to come up with what it even was. "The essay I was writing for school? You seemed well occupied greater than with it before I interrupted. And it's my intention to sit here quietly for a time. Your company isn't required, but it would be welcome." Alden thought writing a paper all alone in a room with the knight sounded unmanageably peculiar. He decided he'd fake it so that he wouldn't hurt Ashurti's feelings. "Which is probably one of the most unnecessary things I've ever worried over," he thought as he pulled his tablet and stylus from his bag. "Pretty sure people like this don't get their feelings hurt by human teenagers they just met." Once he actually started working on the paper again, though, It was surprisingly easy to fall into the task. The temperature was pleasant when he was sitting still, and he'd been doing homework in the sauna lately anyway. Eshurti mostly sat and stared out the window, but a couple of times he left for a few minutes to do something in the adjoining rooms. When he came back from one of those absences and set a small glass of what looked like water on the table beside Alden, it didn't feel like a strange thing to have him serving beverages. Though Alden was surprised when it turned out to be a chilled drink that was both extremely sweet and shockingly sour. Like having lemonade concentrate straight out of the canister, but a little more grapefruity. "Do you like it?" Eshurti asked, watching Alden's face pucker. "I think so. It's really good. I just wasn't expecting it to be so strong. In some regions, it's served to students while they study. Lind hasn't ever lost affection for it." And that was as much as either of them said for a while. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. The human child hurt my feelings, Lind. He was nervous. Around me. Can you imagine? I've decided helping you is less important than winning his approval. I'm giving him your sermon the juice while he writes about Utwi. I'm reading his paper whenever he's not paying attention. It is obvious to me that he's never had a disagreement with a Utwi. But to be more serious, I'm worried about what he's been through in his Hn Lindora, a voice said respectfully from behind the night, interrupting her amusement at her partner's rambling. The avowed skills have recovered enough for him to use the apparatus once more. Shall we wait for Hn Eshurti? Lindora turned from her examination of a small black disc embedded into the exterior wall of the house. There were hundreds more in this wall alone, and in all the walls of all the houses facing the central square. They were hidden when not in use, according to one of the wizards who'd greeted her when she arrived a few minutes before. Talented people had been assigned to guard this area from the floods earlier, and now they guarded it from prying eyes and ears. Lindora could hear the strain in the voice of the woman who'd just called her attention. She needed rest. Eshurti is taking care of something important, Lindora said. And I was only curious about this process since I was nearby. Please continue as you usually do. The woman nodded, but instead of leaving right away, she stayed to offer explanations. The phones and watches being brought in by drone and deposited directly in the grass of the square had all been in use before and during the disaster. Not all of his devices contained the keys, she explained. He couldn't possibly make enough for that. But for those that do have them, he offers superior replacements to the owners in exchange for their return. The keys inside the ones that are being collected now will be fully connected to the apparatus by other avowed soon, increasing its power and the likelihood that it will align with requests. She gestured toward the houses and streets around them to indicate the numerous keys already embedded. He doesn't have the talents necessary to join the keys in this way himself, so he employs those who do. Once his skill is in use, additional recording devices capture the output for analysis. Most of the keys of Izerta are left. Keys of voices are everywhere. There are other types, but they are few in number. Novelties or experiments for him. A man with dark brown hair and a short beard had just exited one of the houses. Despite the fact that the reports Lindora had glanced over said the avowed had exhausted his skills more than once since this all began, he had an energy in his step as he strolled past the growing piles of devices and passed beneath shining, undulating strands that emerged from the top of a large jar-shaped fountain at the center of the square. The contract's decision to deny communication features to most people during the incident encouraged avowed to heavily utilize these infigurate devices, seeking answers about what was going on. Those conversations were recorded and are now purchasable. It also means all the keys within the devices have been better attuned to exactly the kinds of questions we want to ask at this time. Lindora was watching the human press his hand to the fountain. Is this kind of thing not illegal on Earth? I believe it is. But a series of loopholes on Anzidora, I see. Lindora focused on the avowed. She could sense one of his skills taking effect. I should go, the woman who'd been explaining things said with a nod. If you stay for long enough, he will be using a second skill as well. That one may prove more useful to our search for answers in the end. The effect when applied to this many keys is impressive. All at once, the keys activated. All at once, the square was filled with whispers that gradually grew louder. Whispers that hadn't been recorded when the phones holding the black discs were in use. Linda didn't speak a human language, so she couldn't understand them. But the avowed Elias was targeting one word she did know. And she heard it repeated all over the square, in 1,000 voices that were talking about the subject right this second, unaware that their conversations were being overheard here in this place. The same words spoken in so many different ways: fear, rage, boredom, glee, in so many different tongues all at once. Matadero, the humans said. An attack we should have known about, that my old man always said would happen, that nobody could have expected, a hoax, a sign, I told you, who cares about, I've always been scared of, mark my words, this is only the beginning of the end at Matadero. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. A deep, pleased noise from the back of Asherty's throat caught Alden's attention, and he looked up from the final read-through of his paper. It was a good essay. He was going to be annoyed if the assignment was cancelled rather than just postponed. Asherty was smiling, and as Alden took in the expression, he realized just how long the two of them had been together. Didn't knights have better things to spend their time on than watching Rhea B***s do their homework? Maybe this was his version of sleeping. Maybe he's gotten so powerful that he just does downtime instead of actually going to bed. I'm not sure if that would be great or terrible. H will survive and be well, said Asherty. Alden dropped his tablet onto his lap. She's out of surgery would be the wrong word. She's out of the fake healing grove. The room with all the plants in it. He asked. If I remember that particular ritual correctly, she's probably in the fake healing grove with everything but her nose and mouth buried in a pile of dirt. But that's good. Relief and excitement sent Alden to his feet before he could decide what he thought he was going to do on his feet. Oh. I guess I shouldn't go stare at her in her pile of dirt. It's all right with me if you do, but some of the smokes in the room might have unusual effects on a human. Alden sat back down. I sent a message to Porty-Loath, said Asherty, suggesting that I might take you to a human healer since he's going to need several hours to recover. He's trying to convince me that they'll definitely kill you because they won't understand what he's already done to you. I'm sure that's a lie. He frowned. What's your preference? Alden almost said he didn't have one. But that wasn't true. I really want the gash on my hand healed as perfectly as possible, he said. So whatever's best for that. It was a little silly. He thought that even if he had a scar or some pain, his hand was still going to move well thanks to the stats. But he'd been trying for more perfection with his spell casting by really paying attention to the feel of his fingers when they were in action, and if they felt slightly different because of an injury, all of that work would have gone to waste. If you want something healed perfectly, it's best to never let it be healed imperfectly. According to the contract, there are some excellent avowed healers on Earth. But most of them will be very busy, too. If you don't mind waiting for Porty? I'll wait if he can do it. He can do it, said Asherty. You might end up buried in dirt, but it will get done. And I wanted to keep you here longer anyway. Here in this room or here on? In the cube, Asherty clarified before he could ask. Bashnor is on Anzidora. Your involvement with the deaths at his residence and the fiasco greater than with the flyer could make him decide to approach you. He has no reason to come here. I plan to make sure he knows you're not a tool for him to leverage. And I'd like to reassure myself that there are no human laws that will trouble you. I know almost nothing about human laws, so that might take me a short while. I think you may also want to consider a healer of mind for, you don't have to do all of that, Alden interrupted. That's a lot. You must have so many important things to take care of. I will delegate greater than whatever needs to be delegated greater than. Bashnor, at least, you should let me manage. He is a little too powerful for anyone else to do it successfully, and Lind doesn't like politics. He searched Alden's face. Do you disagree? He couldn't. If Escherty really thought the ambassador might bother him, then Alden didn't have any way to stop that himself. "I don't disagree," he said slowly. "And I don't think there should be legal problems, but if there could be, it would be good to know." Escherty drummed the armrest of his chair with his fingertips while he stared at Alden. "I want you to tell me what else you need. You should think about it and do that." "I'm not sure start with little things," said Escherty. "For example, what are you planning to do tomorrow?" Why did this feel like a trick question? "I've got to find something to feed a snake, or I need to get it back to its owner. I want to know what's going on with school. I'd like to find out what happened to all my friends and say hi to my aunt, but the contract won't let me call. And Stuart is supposed to call tomorrow. But I don't know if that would be okay right now. I'm sure Violart could get a call through, but I don't know if she would. If your school is open, do you want to go?" "Well, yes. I would really like to. But if I have to stay here, you're not trapped. I could arrange something. Do you want to talk to Stuart Or do you only want to let him know you're well?" "I would prefer to talk to him," Alden admitted. "Good," said Escherty. "Little things. Tiny cracks in the future. So easy to repair." Chapter 150. "Connie seemed to be in a strange mood," said Alden. He was lying on his side on top of the covers of his hospital bed so that whenever he wasn't focused on the person he was calling, he could see the news stations he had pulled up on the wall. "I don't know what that was." She didn't exactly sound unhappy. But she said we should talk about something, and then she changed her mind. "Do you think the Artonans freaked her out when they collected her?" "Alden, from my perspective, I left your room in intake a few hours ago," said Bo. "Now, I'm nearly blind in a foreign country. Nobody will tell me exactly which country or how I'm getting home. And I almost stepped on a poisoned dart frog when I went to pee." Understandably, Bo sounded tense about all of that. And Alden didn't doubt that his friend was having trouble seeing. The rainforest floor at night couldn't be a bright place, and he didn't have his glasses. Alden couldn't quite picture the situation at the mass teleportation site. He would have expected a large building, but from the snippets of stressed-out description he had gotten, it sounded almost like the people who'd been taken there had just been dumped deep in the Amazon with lots of wizards. "Let me repeat, earlier today, I covered my body with some fronds I found. Then, while I was trying to figure out what was going on and get help, someone sent my furry orange ride back to Chicago without me. Where Connie also is, apparently. Priority shipping for the two of them." Bo exclaimed. "You're worried about her being freaked out? I'm probably going to be killed by a jaguar while the Artonans who are in charge of this wilderness adventure have a few more debates about what to do with me. I don't know if they're leaving me until last because I'm a contract refuser or because they feel like I'm greedy for wanting a travel ticket after they already gave one to your cat." "Turn on video mode," said Alden. "I've never seen an Earth rainforest." "No. And there's nothing to see except me, standing in the dark as far away from everyone else as I can get without getting lost. I wanted to talk to you, but I don't want the last of the humans who are left around here realizing I have an interface and memorizing my appearance." "I am sorry you came out of cat space there," said Alden. "When they asked me who I wanted to save in the event of the world ending, I wasn't thinking about the fact that they would send you somewhere full of other avowed." It's fine. I was just on Anzidora, wasn't I? And I've been. I can't bring myself to say lucky. But not as unlucky as I could have been. I didn't come out of cat space in front of people. Victor was in a force field pin some wizard had made for him. When I appeared, I was just standing naked in the rainforest beside a cat in a magic dome. I considered all the possibilities, decided it was definitely your fault, hey. Found my fronds and followed the sound of voices toward other people. I'm sure everyone who saw me thought I was a lunatic, but at least they were all strangers and we'll never meet again." Alden couldn't quite hold back a laugh. "Are you still wearing nothing but fronds?" "No. Asshole. Don't be ashamed. My crisis wardrobe gets weirder every time. I figure I'm only 2 or 3 disasters away from fronts of my own. Bo vented for a while longer before taking a breath. I'm glad you're back. Alden shifted positions to get more comfortable with his mound of pillows. It would take so long to catch you up on everything that's happened if you'd waited until I was 40 or something. Catching him up was going to take a long time as it was. Too long for them to make a serious start of it right now, and Bo was flustered. He can listen to all my messages from the past couple of weeks when he's got a minute. And then he could share and explain the Zeride-saving story when Bo was safely back home and things were calmer. Don't even joke about that, Bo was saying. I seriously worry about pulling a Rip Van Winkle. That's such an antique reference. We had to read it for English while you were gone and compare it to a modern-day time travel book. I think it's been almost a year since I read a book that wasn't for a class or for wizardry, Alden realized. Last Christmas break, that popular but terrible one about the arrival of Artonans making a bunch of werewolves reveal their existence to the rest of humanity. Hey, he said, I left you some messages. The boater was a fail. I don't think I made a difference in their lives at all. But I tried, and I'm done with it. There's some other stuff. I'll tell you about it when you're home and you've dealt with your own life. It's your turn to be the surprise returnee. I hope that goes well for you. Bo's voice turned suspicious. What kind of stuff? I've been in a disaster. Naturally, there was a little bit of stuff. I'm not sure if some of it even qualifies under the terms of our accord. Why don't you tell me what it was, and I'll decide. As an example, I was on the span when the Pacific went less Pacific. I literally can't leave you alone for 2 weeks. That was in no way my fault. There was this guy I agreed to share my emergency teleport with. I didn't stick my neck out for him, and he was such a shithead that I wish I hadn't bothered. All I really did was save my classmates from his presence. So I'm pretty sure you don't also have to find a shithead to transport somewhere. Even Bo's silences sounded suspicious now. Neat trick. You do have to save a Great Dane, though, Alden added. And a snake. You found a pet store in need of a hero. I really will tell you everything later. Okay, Bo said after a second. I was watching some news footage before I got your call. It looks like it was insane there. And the system sending me a safety notice for you but not letting me talk to you directly was worrying me a little. But you say you've already been healed. Partially. The healer here, not talking about Matadero on the call he shouldn't even be allowed to make, was a given. Will be seeing me again soon. I've been walking around all day, though. It's just a busted ankle, a cut on my hand, and a lot of scrapes and bruises. From the span? I told you the Pacific got unpacific with me. And with the rest of the island. It was a lot. It threw me around like a toy. I thought I would freeze to death. I was afraid a brute who was a pretty decent dude would panic and steal my shoes. I lost half of my remaining faith in humanity when I watched someone try to kill Zeride on !H while she was helpless. Alden stared at the videos playing on the wall without seeing them properly. It feels like every time I try to be even a little good, the universe sucks me dry and gives me back less than I had to start with. I'm glad you're alright, said Bo. Sorry I wasn't there. Yeah. Why couldn't this have happened before you ditched me? Alden replied. We could have made memories together. Line of asterisks. Alden called Jeremy and discovered that his friend had spent all day Saturday knocking on doors and checking animal shelters because he assumed Victor had escaped from his house. Only for the cat to reappear in his room, along with $3. That makes no sense. Maybe the $3 were there already, and you just forgot. 3 brand new dollar bills with no wrinkles. I would have remembered putting those on my dresser, Jeremy insisted. He was on his way into a convenience store. I'm using them to buy cherry Coke. I had a whole bottle last week, and now it's gone. Mom says she's off sugar, but I know it was her. So why was Victor disappearing your fault? Weren't you busy dodging super tsunamis? Well, nobody had told Alden whether or not the evacuation to the Amazon was a secret, and he hadn't thought to ask Bo or Connie if the Artonans had sworn them to silence upon their arrival. Zoraide wouldn't tell me the location until she got confused with a head injury, so I guess it's at least partially a secret? Or an unsecret secret. There was a blip of a mention of the Flyers leaving Anzidora on the news. And, after all, if someone had asked Alden on Thursday whether or not he thought the Artonans had some kind of a planetary evacuation plan in the event of a catastrophe, he'd have assumed the answer was yes. He just wouldn't have known for sure what triggered the evac, how they planned to do it, or that he would be chosen to leave himself. Maybe I just don't want to tell him the truth. Maybe I just feel guilty. Saying, "You were my third choice," wasn't much of a compliment when there were only two choices. If he's really mad about it. Alden took a breath. I can't give you many details, but it seems like the Artonans have put me on a list of people who get to leave if the planet has so much as a hiccup. As, like, an apology for the Thagund thing? Asked Jeremy. Good. They should apologize to you more. They only let me pick 2 people to go with me, Alden said. He realized he'd been expecting a dramatic pause as soon as he didn't get one. Only 2? An electronic doorbell chimed as Jeremy headed into the shop and stopped to examine a display of chips. I mean, 2 is a lot more than 0, but man, I'd have a heart attack trying to pick. He's not upset at all? Jeremy was good-natured and upbeat, but this seemed like too casual of a response. If I ever get a 3rd slot, said Alden, you would be. Jeremy was bending down to see the hot and spicy chips on the bottom of the display. He really didn't look bothered at all. Would you come? Alden asked, suddenly uncertain. If I put your name in the 3rd slot? His friend finally looked back at the phone in his hand. You mean in a real Titanic situation? I'm told there's not much risk of it ever coming to that. But, yes? Jeremy stared off into space, still crouching there by the chips with the doorbell chiming as someone else entered or exited the store. Wow. Thank you. I think I would, he said at last. I'd want to stay with my family, but if I did that and they found out, it'd hurt them, right? We'd all hit the iceberg together, and they'd know I could have survived, which would just make everything more terrible for them instead of helping them. So yeah, I would come. But you need to be prepared to tie me up and drag me along in case I'm stupid in the moment. There was a hint of a joke in his voice. Stop getting taller if you want me to carry you, Alden said, forcing the same lightness into his own words. If you hit 6'3", you go down with the ship. They chatted for a while longer. When the call ended, Alden went to sit in the room's one chair beside his scaly companion. Jeremy's feelings aren't hurt because I wouldn't be in his top 2 either, he said after a moment. I wouldn't even be in his top 5, probably. I would have known that if I'd thought harder about it. He has a lot of family. He has his girlfriend. He'll have Bo when Bo gets home. If Bo's not an unfriendly dumbass. Tiny Snake was in its bento cave, digesting the baby mouse that Escherty had sent for it via Wizard Messenger. When Alden tried to imagine the process that must have led to a miniature snake dinner being delivered all the way to Matadero, he got a lot of confusing images. I'm glad he wasn't upset. He watched the reptile. After deciding that it was a young corn snake, and thus not deadly, he had held it for a few minutes before its meal arrived. Letting it crawl around his hand and arm had been interesting, and he was conscious of the fact that he was already much too attached to it. Tiny Snake had a name. They'd been through a shit together. The Longs couldn't even take care of themselves. Should they really be trusted with Alden's survival buddy? They had a nice tank for it. And Liam said it was friendly. I have a cat named Victor. I'll probably get him back soonish. Tiny Snake stuck its tongue out. It was alive and safe and full of mouse. Stupid Liam, said Alden. I guess I'd better text him. Maybe he doesn't want you back. He accessed his interface with a thought. Liam, I rescued your snake from the rubble outside of Apogee. I hope you and your brother and sister are fine. If you're too busy to take care of it right now, I'd be happy to do it for however long. Loot, are you doing all right? I think I might be able to get to campus tomorrow for a little while. What? Hoyu, I saw your mom on television bashing the heck out of that inflatable dinghy that was cannonballing through the streets down in. Are you all fine, Lexi? The Neelima building. Hi, Natalie. Yes. I'm safe. Sorry I've been out of touch. Are you alright? What do you mean Elijah got possessed? Winston, thank you for checking on me and for offering to help me with my image. I'm sure you're a great video editor, but I don't feel like releasing my selection story. Especially not this week. Vandy, I appreciate the reminder about the vigil on campus, but I'm not going to be able to make it to tonight's. So I do still have your teeth, Con, but... Line of asterisks. The replies to Alden's messages trickled in while he watched the news. The texts were almost all brief and rushed in tone. Even from his roommates. Makes sense. Everyone's busy. The wall in front of him was giving him a view of 4 different channels at once. He could enlarge one and turn the volume on by pointing at it. But there was so much to take in that he couldn't absorb any of it as well as he should have been able to. Every newscast held a different scene of heroism, tragedy, or commentary. As for how the disaster had happened, a story that was basically the same as what he heard from Zeridi and Ashurti was the official one. There was the addition of a suspected link to the often violent movement known as superhumans at large and mention of the person who was likely responsible being in the company of others. Investigations were ongoing, and names weren't being released to the public yet. The number of dead was confirmed at just under 300. Far more were injured. When Alden first heard, he thought, oh, that's so good. And then he realized that his wavelength was different from everyone else's as the faces of the victims' families and friends kept appearing and everybody kept talking about the scale of the tragedy. He tried so hard to feel the right things. He couldn't quite get there. The large number still looked small to him because of that fear he'd had in his gut that it was so much worse. Thousands. Tens of thousands. The world. He knew it was strange, but he couldn't stop being relieved that it wasn't the world. Some people were pointing out that there was nowhere else on Earth where an event that destroyed so much, so quickly could take the lives of so few. The 2 tips of Apex, once among the most desirable real estate on the island, looked like junkyards. There were swaths on the west and northwest coast of F-City that weren't much better. Paragon Academy, where his roommates had attended school until recently, was gone. But Avowed were harder to kill, and they were available for mobilization in an instant if the Triplanets wanted. And the Triplanets had wanted. A huge number of emergency orders had gone out. Even the Anisidran newscasters who bothered to try offering a judgment on the matter seemed to be struggling to land on opinions about the Artonans' actions. It was a strange thing to see. The local Avowed news people didn't often stutter and stumble. They all had voices that made you glad to listen, from buttery and soothing to bright and bubbly. No such thing as a bad hair day. Never a lack of confidence or composure. But on Channel 6, during a show that featured a member of each of the 6 largest Avowed classes, the Maestra had started out criticizing the Artonans for not giving the Anisidran government a chance to organize a response on their own, while the Adjuster had praised them for bypassing niceties in order to reduce the number of lives lost. By the end of the hour, they'd exhausted most of their energy for the topic and accidentally talked each other into the opposite positions before mutually agreeing that the important thing now was to grieve and rebuild. Earlier in the day, the President of the High Council had given a speech that focused so heavily on the contributions of Avowed who had used their powers to protect their homeland without being ordered to do so, that it had started to feel a little like she was deliberately downplaying the work of everyone who'd been red pillowed. Alden went from finding the speech uplifting to being annoyed that she was trying to make a point without actually making it. But then again, he'd assumed it was a veiled complaint about the summonings, only for one of the commentators afterward to say it was an ill-timed dig at high ranks, who'd been the vast majority of the Red Halos, and an attempt to pander to the C and below demographic. So what the hell do I know? Alden had thought, before changing the channel. A few of the news shows from other countries were tastelessly trying to calculate the amount of our gold the Triplanets had shelled out to issue all the orders. By law, Avowed had to be paid when they were summoned, even if they were summoned to save their own city. Meanwhile, one of the Anisidran stations had a counter on the screen ticking up every time they received a report of someone using their fragile atmosphere signing bonus. There had been an interview with a man who thought he should be given another one under the circumstances, because what if something like this happened again? Almost everyone who had died by refusing evacuation, or they had died very suddenly around the time the disaster began. The system hadn't been able to locate individual sinker center particles or perfectly predict their effects. One of the wizards who was speaking as an expert on the device was doing a good job of explaining that it was unreasonable to expect a sound but youthful contract to correctly analyze vastly complex, never-before-seen magical events on the spot. Some boats had been yanked so deep so quickly that the victims were killed in an instant. Others had been pulled down just as quickly, only to be protected by the sinker center's own magic for a while, allowing the system time to teleport the people on board to safety or teleport help to them. There was also dramatic footage of a melee at a shelter on Bunker Street. Word had gone around that it was better than all of the other evacuation destinations in the area. In order to travel there, people had bypassed the safe places that had been recommended by the system, and upon arriving to find the shelter full, they had prevented the doors from closing and swarmed the entrance. Red halos had been sent in to push them back. To add to the confusion, a small number of those people, who were being called doomsday preppers on most channels, had tried to mount an organized assault on the shelter's defenders. The use of violent powers from a few had tipped the many over the edge, creating an us versus them situation that made everyone feel like the end was nigh and they had permission to engage in a war in the streets for the sake of their own survival. Some of the talking heads were trying to explain crowd psychology. Others were discussing how, with so many avowed wielding weapons and having powers designed for battle, it was a wonder that serious fights hadn't broken out elsewhere. Speaking of Bunker Street, we have reports that the combat was halted by a wizard who's becoming a familiar figure as more footage of the disaster reaches us. Greater than. Alden spotted a segment on the Punta de la Luna area starting up on another channel, and he switched to it. Several times, on every show, people mentioned that this was still early days. The narrative would change. Understanding would change. Everyone was just beginning to pick up the pieces. Around 9 p.m., which felt much later thanks to his screwed-up brain clock, Alden fell asleep to the sound of a voice saying, "We don't yet know how, or how much, this terrible tragedy will change things for our beloved Anzidora, but we know they will change. Tonight, I will be holding my children close." Line of asterisks. Portiloth had Alden's pharmacy drone wake him up 6 hours later. He had just enough time to rub the sleep from his eyes and get out of the bed before the wizard healer appeared, wheeling in a medical cart. Alden felt himself smile at the sight of it. I doubt the manufacturers expected someone to build a fire on top of that thing. The fire was smokeless, and it was heating a deep cast iron pan full of what looked like muddy reddish paint. "You aren't watching Coolpack," Portiloth said disapprovingly, staring at the silent news still playing on the wall. "Was that a prescription I was supposed to follow right away? I will soon. I am going to paint your wounds with a potion brewed from the ground of your birthplace," Portiloth announced. "You got ground from America?" "Peaceful Union Birthing House." Alden stared at the pan. He had gone just a tad more specific than America then. "I regret to tell you that they didn't record the precise location of your separation from your mother," Portiloth said in a truly regretful voice. "Only a building. Unthinkable. Greater than, a lot more specific. Don't worry your minds." Portiloth jabbed a paddle-shaped wooden implement into the potion and stirred. "This is made of wood from the first tree you would have passed under on your way out of the building. Should I not have been born in a building?" Alden wondered. "I'm sure Tonans have babies in buildings all the time. Tion Shirty will care for the rest of it," Portiloth said. "The rest of what?" The healer looked up. "He will arrange for the proper storage greater than of the tree and the ground." Several questions later, Alden finally understood that a tree and a vehicle full of dirt had been purchased from a birthing center he hadn't even known the name of in Tennessee. "He means a dump truck, doesn't he?" He was now standing shirtless at the foot of the bed, holding his hand out while Portiloth packed the deep gouge with mud. It didn't hurt. A perfectly normal-looking injector had taken care of that. Somewhere, A whole tree and a dump truck full of my birthplace dirt is being stored. Valuable personal spell ingredients. Just in case he ever needed them again. Why? As if to punctuate the question, one of the channels he was watching while the healer worked showed an aerial view of the neighborhood Alden had been rescued from. He was reading the subtitles with the volume off because he didn't want to interrupt the healing chants, and the newscasters were talking about Lindotta and Escherty. They were explaining to viewers that two of the highest-ranked wizards, generals from the Mother Planet's anti-chaos force, had been on hand for dealing with Matadero and had lent their help after the cube was secured. The scale of that help was being shown with overlays that indicated how far inland the water could have progressed without their interference. Alden hadn't been that far from safety when he'd nearly drowned. A line was drawn across the crescent, indicating the area where Wizard Zanavowd had chosen to defend against the incursion of the water. Just a few streets more, and Alden would have made it to them. A few impossible streets. If Escherty and his partner hadn't dealt with the massive build-up of water that had almost killed him and Zoraide, the collapse of it would have sent a megawave past the defenders' line into parts of Apex that hadn't been completely evacuated. It would have forced everyone else to scramble, destroying more homes and lives. Why is someone like Escherty involving himself in all these little unimportant details for me? Alden thought. At a time like this? It's not like it should matter to anyone else if I get dirt or my phone calls or snake food. Those things are all inconveniences for me to put up with, not crises for a knight to handle. And Escherty was handling important matters. Alden had wondered if the Artonan's skill wasn't at all helpful for the current problem, but according to the subtitles, he had been using magic to degrade the contaminant throughout the enormous quantities of water that his partner put on pause. Alden watched the segment on the two knights until it ended. It wasn't long, probably because there was no video of the two knights actually doing magic, and saying how strong Generals Escherty and Lindotta were wasn't as exciting as showing how badass other people looked using their powers. It's fine that Earth calls them generals in English. I don't like it as much as Knight, but at least it's establishing chain of command for chaos events through vocabulary. The main Artonan spokesperson on Anisidoran News was Bashnor. If a demon crawled out of the ground in downtown F right now, Alden didn't want anyone getting confused and assuming the ambassador was supposed to be the knight's boss. Bashnor was largely inoffensive on camera. Alden had indulged his own bias earlier by looking for flaws, but the ambassador's prepared statements were tidy mixes of polite condolences and facts that matched up with what most of the other Artonans were saying. There was a lot of, such and such matter is still under consideration. He also looked nothing at all like Alden had pictured. Bashnor was a small man dressed in gray who delivered the messages clearly and slowly with a hint of condescension so minuscule that it might have been imagined. He didn't seem like someone who threw grand parties all the time and rode mechanical bulls. Now let's take a look at what happened at the intake dorms, greater than the subtitle said. They are all still standing and everyone there was safe, but we have another reported sighting of that very recognizable wizard who has not slept since arriving on Earth in the middle of the disaster. Greater than. The sound of the door opening drew Alden's attention. When he looked over his own mud-potioned shoulder he saw Escherty letting himself into the room. While Alden had been benefiting from the knight's help all afternoon and evening, he hadn't seen him in person since just after lunchtime. "This house of healing is peaceful," Escherty exclaimed. "The halls around the rooms I share with Lind are full of pests greater than now that people have decided to take their rests." He meant my fellow Artonans when he said pests. Alden had poked his head into the cafeteria to grab a sandwich and say hello to Kabir before hauling himself away for the evening, but there had been no sandwiches left to grab. Hotel Matadero was being used as housing for the wizards who traveled to Anzidora to serve as the disaster response crew. They'd all stayed out and about for a conspicuously long time, and even now, there seemed to be some attempt at a polite fiction that they were all coming back to Matadero to check on it. As opposed to crashing out in the cafeteria surrounded by empty plates, like one elderly woman Alden had spotted. It was like it would be gauche for them to say, "My magic's worn out, I need a nap, and my species actually functions very poorly if we go more than a couple of days without eating." Linda and I should move. So many pleasing empty rooms in this section. Is that the snake? Shirty walked over to the table where Tiny Snake's plastic tub sat, looking curious. He had hissed and emphasized the S in snake, so it came out as snake. Given that our Tonan adults had much better vocal control than humans, Alden suspected he knew that snakes hissed from researching them. So he was either trying to interact with the animal itself, or he was giving the word additional color to be social and amusing. "You would not look out of place on our planet," he said to the snake. "I might think you were a slimelasunzi. Did you eat the mouse? Did it eat the mouse and like it?" Alden mentally put the likelihood that he had been talking to the snake directly a little higher. He was probably looking forward to seeing some Earth animals, he realized. "I wanted to see Rhea be *ts when I went to the Triplanets. The facility here has to be one of the least fun places ever to start your vacation on another world." "It seemed to enjoy the mouse very much," Alden said, assuming that it was all right to talk over Portillo's chanting since Shirty was doing it. "Thank you for that. And for the calling permissions. And for the ground from my birthplace in the tree. Honey locust." "What?" "Your birth tree. I am having it sent to my house because even though there is a garden associated with your current dwelling, greater than it's very small and unprotected." "Okay. The first tree that ever shaded my infant face is still alive even though they stole some of its wood for this spoon Portillo is massaging my ribcage with. It's going to live on the Triplanets. Almost certainly in a night rapport. This is starting to feel." Shirty doesn't know, does he? Is this his way of nudging me toward realizing that he knows? Next, Alden would find out that his fairy godfather here had gone to fetch his clothes and his learning cushion, and they'd been moved to a cozy little extraterrestrial location for safekeeping, too. And then a few hours from now, he'll say, "Alden, wouldn't your body be more comfortable with your tree and your possessions? A growing wizard shouldn't live too far from his birth dirt. Let's pack you up and ship you to meet it." He swallowed even though his mouth was devoid of saliva. Shirty was leaning closer to sniff Tiny Snake's container. "Thank you for keeping those safe for me," Alden said. Why? You're thanking me for doing things that are simple and necessary for your health and well-being. I'm the one who's asked you to stay here at the cube for a time. How are you feeling?" "Muddy and concerned." "I'm good. I also had someone obtain this for you." Shirty tapped one of his rings to a thick, brown triangle shape that hung from his belt like a decoration. A perfectly folded Chilean North uniform appeared in his hand. Alden stared at it. Shirty tapped the belt again, and a pair of black dress shoes were suddenly in the other hand. "There is no regular class for students at your school tomorrow. But you have a student assembly at 10 o'clock. Alden was aware of that, since CNH had sent out an email. All students who were currently in Apex were supposed to be there, and all students who were in F were to attend by calling in. Did he check the school website? Alden hoped he had checked the school website. If he had called directly, then whoever answered him was probably freaking and trying to figure out why Undertone in general wanted to know the class schedule. Or Shirty had just told them the truth, and right now, Alden wasn't sharp enough to think through what that might do to his life. "I'm sorry your instructors will not be teaching. You wrote and earn is greater than essay, and routine can be sucker greater than. It's all right." He had wanted school to start back pretty badly so that he could have the normalcy of it. "I can attend by video. And what about Ambassador Bash? Bashnor has a busy day tomorrow, which I have contrived greater than to make busier for him." Portillo chuckled mid-chant. "You may engage with greater than your human peers," said Shirty. "Someone trustworthy will keep an eye and a mind on you in case Bashnor finds a way to bother you." Both of his eyes flicked past Alden toward the television wall. "Or in case anyone else does." When Alden followed the direction of the knight's interest, he found himself reading subtitles that said, "And here he is again." It is impressive how quickly the bald general broke up a fight that was giving quite a few of our local S ranks some trouble. What a spell. Greater than. A couple dozen of out from the Bunker Street riot were all up in the air and wearing frantic expressions as their legs climbed what looked like invisible staircases toward outer space. Sandwiched between them and the subtitles, offering a red hollowed woman a potion vial with one hand and casting with the other, was a tall, bald wizard so covered in tattoos that his skin looked like a circuit board. Did they just call him Tion in their language? Escherdy said in a disgusted voice. I hope he gave them that misapprehension himself so that I can comment on the matter. Joe? Said Alton, gaping at the screen. What's he doing here? Tobe continued,